Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I wanted to take some time and answer some of the questions I've been receiving lately. Ever since doing the today.com interview, I have gotten a lot of new followers, and one of my most asked questions is, were our babies IVF or natural? And so I wanted to just dedicate this video to answering that question for anyone who wanted to know a little bit about our journey. And so the answer to that question is technically neither. A little bit of background on that is my husband and I got married in 2016, and in about 2018 we started to try and quickly realized that it wasn't happening. Kind of like we thought it was like in the movies. You just try to get pregnant and boom, you're pregnant. And after a couple of months I started to sense that maybe something was wrong. And that is when we decided to consult with a doctor. I quickly was diagnosed with PCOS, and that just means you have irregular periods and therefore you don't ovulate just like you're supposed to. And so I had always known I had irregular periods. I just didn't know how that connected to PCOS in any way, and that's when I learned about it. And at that time, we were put on Clomid. For anybody who does not know or is familiar with Clomid, that is a medication that is given to women to help them ovulate. It's a pretty strong medication, but we did get started in a very small dosage. And we were started at 50 for 3 months. Then we tried 100 for a couple months. And then we were at 100. 150 and essentially at 300, which is the highest dosage a doctor can prescribe. And eventually we were able to conceive our son Drayson Antonio, and that was late 2019. We gave birth in the middle of the pandemic, so that was extremely hard, but he was our Clomid baby. And after giving birth to Drayson, we wanted to try again. If you know my husband, he has always wanted to be a girl dad. And so we figure we will get started trying right away. We anticipated that it would take time, again, because of my condition. Little did we know it would be a lot harder than the first time around. My doctor was pretty adamant I would not be able to conceive without any medication. But we still wanted to, just try, give it some months, see how that would work. And after realizing it was not happening, then we got started again on Clomid. And again, I was pretty confident because I conceived the first time around that I would be able to conceive a second time around. And it would just, it's a matter of getting in the right dosage. And so the doctor did start me on Clomid on 300 right away, because that's what it took me to conceive the first time around. And he was confident that, hey, maybe that's what we need to do to, be able to get you to conceive again. So I got started on 300 and we tried that for a couple months and it was unsuccessful. And then we did a combination of medications. We did Clomid with metformin. We did metformin by itself. Metformin with, there was another one I tried and it didn't work. So you name it, we tried it. And it had at this point been 12 consecutive months of being on Clomid along with other medications. And the doctor was starting to lose hope. And that's when we got referred to a fertility doctor where they ran a lot of tests, a lot of blood work. And it's a very time-consuming and emotionally and physically difficult time. I felt very lonely during this time because I felt like every time I would try to talk to people about my infertility journey, people tend to not know what to say, so they say the wrong things. And so I got hit a lot with, well, you got one, so clearly you're not infertile, or, oh, you got one, so you should be thankful. Or the typical, don't stress and it will happen. That one always gave me a kick. And so it was one of those where I just decided to deal with it in private. Not a lot of people knew we were struggling. And then once we started the fertility treatments, lots of blood work, lots of testing, studies that are done, they check a lot of things. The doctor kind of felt like we could try IUI, but he was feeling like you will most likely have to go through IVF. And so my husband and I took the time to sit down and discuss it. And I just personally felt like I did not want to go the IVF route. I was feeling like my body, my mind, my soul could not take that. It was such a roller coaster of emotions, feeling like this month is going to happen, this month is going to happen, and it just wouldn't happen. I was feeling defeated, and I did not feel like I had the energy or the mental strength to go through IVF, because the IVF process is a lot more invasive, and therefore I just was not comfortable with it. And my husband agreed that if the IUI rounds were not successful, we would just stay with an only child. And again, because the doctor felt like IUI would not be successful, he only recommended 3 rounds of IUI. And if those were not successful, then he wanted us to move on with IVF. So we did all of the test, blood work, testing, and eventually we started our IUI rounds. How that usually works is they give you, I was put on a medication that is called letrozole. For anybody who is familiar with that, letrozole, it's a lot more mild than Clomid, but the doctor just wanted to start there. And so I actually started on a very small dosage of letrozole. And you take that for 5 days, and then you go in for a sonogram to make sure that your body did ovulate. And at that time, they confirmed that I had 1 healthy follicle. And I was waiting for the call from the doctor to confirm that I can take my trigger shot, and then we can move forward with the IUI the following day. But I waited and noticed I did not get a call. I mean, I was excited because they had said, hey, you did ovulate. But at that time, they had not told me how many follicles I had or if there was any concern at the time. But around 6 p.m. that night, I received a call from the doctor, and they confirmed that I did ovulate 1 follicle, meaning 1 egg. And it was all from my right ovary. My left ovary has always been I like to joke that it's a non-functional. Even when they did my egg count, my left ovary, I think only had 3 eggs in comparison to my right that had like 16. And so the doctor said, hey, you can go ahead and take the trigger shot, the trigger injection. But we do not believe it might be successful because you do have a cyst that is blocking your right ovary, and that might prevent that egg to get released. I was kind of down about that. We knew I had a cyst, but when I went through all of the testing, they said that it was not big enough that could fully prevent from me ovulating. So I was a little shocked that it was a concern, but again, it did not take me by surprise because I knew I did have a cyst blocking my right ovary when we did all of the testing. So I went ahead, took the trigger shot that night, and the following day we went to do our IUI. And when we go into the office, my husband and I just we're excited. Hey, finally, we're getting to where we want to be. And when we see the doctor, I decided to ask, because again, when you're going to go to fertility treatments, they have you take training, classes, videos, you have to watch all of these things that is separate from your doctor, your OB giving you medication. And so obviously multiples was always a possibility. But once you go through fertility treatments, you kind of just want to get pregnant. That's why you're there. And again, when we took the classes, the multiples was more of a risk with IVF, meaning if you transfer a certain amount of embryos, they can split and those type of things, and not so much with IUI. Kind of how we interpreted at the time. But I did ask the doctor, I was pretty adamant, hey, can you check how many eggs did I ovulate? Like, how many follicles did I have? And she's like, okay. So she steps out of the room. She goes, checks the records. She comes back and she says, you only have one healthy follicle. And she's like, and because you have that cyst blocking that ovary that is, supposed to release the follicle, we don't think this is going to be your month where you will conceive. And so they gave us like less than 10% chance that we will get pregnant. And so we were sad, but we were still hopeful. And we prayed about it. We left that day like, hey, this is most likely not going to happen. I can promise you that doctor left that room. She was pretty like, hey, don't get discouraged, but this is not going to happen. That was kind of like her attitude. And so I was like, whatever. We waited and I was anxious. I was very, very anxious. And then I kept taking tests. Guys, I spent so much money on pregnancy tests. I kept testing after about 7 or 10 days, I started testing and testing and testing. Even though they tell you don't test until 14 days. But in my mind, I was like, is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? Like, am I not going to be able to conceive a second child? And it was extremely hard. Again, there's very few people or friends that knew about it. But eventually, I got a positive test and I waited until the next day to tell my husband because I wanted to test again and be sure like if it was correct and it wasn't a false positive. So after that, I get the call from the doctor like 3 days later because you have to wait for the office to call you and say, hey, you're good to come in so we can do your blood work and see if you are pregnant. And that is when I got the call 3 days later. They say, hey, you got to come in. We got to do your blood work and see where your levels are at. So I went in, I tested. My levels were at 650. And I don't know why, but I remember asking like, hey, that number seems a little off. Like, isn't it supposed to be a lot smaller or less? And she said, no, that's about right. We just want to make sure it doubles. In 2 days, that number has to double for it to consider a successful pregnancy. If your levels stay about the same, then it probably is like a false positive. So I was like, okay. So I think I went either the next day or 2 days later, we test again for my blood work. And at this time is at 1200. And I was like, holy cow, that's a lot. And I asked, I was like, hey, is that a sign of multiples? And she said, no, not at all. All we want to do is know that, you have your levels to show that they are doubling every couple days for it to be considered a successful pregnancy that is going in the right direction. But in a couple weeks, we will schedule you for you to come in and then we can look and see how the pregnancy is going. So it's not something that's immediate. You don't just get to go the next day and get an ultrasound. I don't remember what the time frame was, but I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks after that blood work where I will get to go in and find out our news. And that will be left for another episode because that was a lengthy, very specific day that I will never forget. But little did we know we were having quadruplets. I will tell you that during that time, I wanted to tell my family and I wanted my husband and I to tell our in-laws because when we found out we were pregnant the first time, we were so excited that we did not wait until our first ultrasound. We just like told them, hey, we're finally expecting. And although that's kind of like frowned upon, I wanted to because I feel like it took so long to be able to get pregnant and we had to go through so much. But my husband had this feeling of like, no, let's just wait it out. Let's just wait it out. And I'm kind of glad we did because then we had to go through the roller coaster of finding out we're having quadruplets and the doctors feeling like, hey, you have a very high risk pregnancy. And so the recommendations were not what we were expecting. But with that being said, it was a complete shock to find out that we were expecting, let alone expecting quadruplets when the doctors did not think that we will be able to get pregnant. I will share that my husband and I for a very long time felt like maybe the doctors missed something. And we were pretty angry to have been put in a position where we thought, hey, we took all this training, and the training says that if you release a certain amount of eggs and you are at a higher risk of conceiving multiples, you have to sign like paperwork agreeing that you are okay moving forward and that you accept the risk with that. We never had any of that. We never were presented with, hey, you have 4 eggs, and so therefore you could have quadruplets. That was never ever the case. And so we felt like the doctors had missed something. And after, having to consult with other doctors, like, how does this happen? Why did we end up pregnant with quadruplets? There was, again, there was only one follicle. Like, how does this happen? And again, we will never have the answers to that question. There's been different, considering that they're all fraternal. We know that it was not like the egg fertilized and then it split. Clearly, there had to have been 4 eggs that were all fertilized separately. But we did get to see the scans from my sonogram. And the doctor did, bring us into the office and said, I'm going to show you guys what we saw. And you can clearly see my left ovary never ovulated. So there was no eggs that were released or follicles that were there for it to be inseminated. And then you look at my right ovary and you do see like 1 egg that is healthy, 1 follicle. And so we don't know if after I took my trigger shot that made the egg split 4 times prior to insemination. Again, we would never know the answers to that questions because you don't get a sonogram the day of the insemination. You only get a sonogram prior to inseminating to see if you ovulated. But obviously, it was God's plan all along. We know that now, and we have accepted that. Our children are a blessing. It was a roller coaster that we never anticipated. But I do want to close by saying that for any woman out there who may be struggling with infertility, there was a book I read. It's called The Silent Cry. It was actually written by one of my friends who is still waiting for her miracle baby. And it was a book that helped me a lot, just trying to process all of those emotions. Infertility not only affects you personally, it affects your spouse, it affects your marriage, it affects your family as a whole. You're constantly being grilled. Society feels like, well, if you just got married, when are the kids coming? And so you get bombarded with a ton of questions. You don't know how to process them. You don't know how to answer them. And it is a very difficult process to go through. And so my prayer goes out to all the women out there praying for their miracle baby. Don't be afraid to reach out. Possibly reach out to someone who's been through it versus just your regular friend or family who may not understand what you're going through. And again, that's why I kept a lot of it to myself, because I had a lot of friends who weren't married or did not have family. They weren't even trying to conceive. And so it just felt out of place, me trying to reach out to them and tell them what I was going through. But if you know someone out there who is struggling with infertility, try to be of support, try to be there, try to pray for them. Just say, hey, I'm thinking of you. I had a friend who constantly reached out to me. She knew I was going through the infertility journey, and she wasn't in my face, that type of friend. She was more of like, I'm thinking of you. I'm praying of you. I'm praying for your miracle baby. Hey, you're in my thoughts today. Let me know if you need anything. Let me know if you need a visit. But she never try to pry on me and my privacy or my journey. And she happens to be the one person that we told I was pregnant with quadruplets, while we kept everything in quiet and we did not know how to approach the news. And so that meant a lot. That went a long way for me. So if you are that person who's on the other side, be careful in what you say. I don't necessarily feel like people have ill intentions when they say things and they know somebody's struggling with infertilities. But I can tell you, if you say don't stress about it, or if you don't think about it, you'll get pregnant, definitely not the right thing to say. Please know, you know, there's no way not to stress about it. I think as women, that is our desire, to be able to be mothers and give our partners a child, or even for ourselves. But for that, I just say try to be of support if you can. But that was our journey. So stay tuned for part 2, where I will share the day that we found out we were having quadruplets. I can tell you it's a day I would never forget. I thought I was being pranked. But again, stay tuned for that video. Thank you for watching. And if you have any other questions, please drop them in the comments. Otherwise, thank you for following, supporting us, and all of your love and support. Bye, guys.